Welcome to our study of the Life Divine. Tonight we intend to finish the 21st chapter, the Order of the Worlds. But I want to mention something before we proceed. Today is the 3rd of September. It is the birth anniversary of Sri T.V. Kapali Shastriya, one of the greatest spiritual personalities who gathered around Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. He first met Sri Aurobindo around the time of Shankara Jayanti in 1917, 100 years ago. Worth mentioning that it is a centenary, roughly, since their meeting, and he was realized in many aspects of Indian spiritual practice, initiated into the Sri Vidya by his father when just a tot. And if you remember, the Sri Vidya is that great tantric teaching which came down from Kashmir, the great Trika philosophy, driven out by Muslim conquest, found refuge, ironically, in the south of India, and in this particular form, husbanded and protected by Shankara's own mats. Even though the Sri Vidya has at its core this luminous vision of a manifestation in the universe of a divine reality, that the universe is not the play of an illusion or a trick, but is an intentional manifestation of the divine consciousness itself. And beauty is a key to gaining access to it. And to come back to Kapali, if you look at his being, always he is beautiful. The few photographs that we have of him left, the mellifluous mastery of language, in English, of course, but primarily in Sanskrit, in Tamil, in Telugu as well. A philosopher, a psychologist, a knower of many sciences, and dear to us as the person who, looking at the magnificent wide truth that Sri Ramana Maharshi had embodied and installed on Runachala, nevertheless felt the call from Mother and Sri Aurobindo to carry forward the Indian tradition on a progressive curve that reveals the still hidden secrets of evolution. Pardon me. It is up to great beings like Kapali to then come behind and accompany Sri Aurobindo and the Mother and explain the richness of their vision within the context of the hoary traditions of ancient India. And this he did better than any one of his contemporaries. And of course, we have M.P. Pandit, who lived and studied with Kapali for many years in the Sri Aurobindo ashram, inspired by him, who has presented to the world, most tellingly, Sri Aurobindo's philosophy in language accessible to the many. So, erudite, elegant, powerful was Kapali. And another kind of presentation, another kind of power, and another kind of beauty speaks through M.P. Pandit. It is his centenary that we celebrate in 2018. So this is a year, hundreds and hundreds Let us enjoy these times. What Sri Aurobindo has been describing in this 21st chapter, The Order of the Worlds, is how it is that these intricate fields of being are interlaced with each other and do not stand separate and do not rise simply out of a material foundation, but rather express the various kinds of powers that the divine has within its own conscious being, giving each its own order of reality in which it can dominate and have its own field of experience. And yet, all penetrate all. All the planes of conscious being are present in all the others. Nothing is absent anywhere, and there is only a single, all-encompassing, all-embracing reality. Best not to give it a name. But if we have to say something about it, we can say that it is, that it's aware of itself, and that its own experience is delightful. It is Satchit Ananda. So we pick up his argument where he's described these worlds above, which are nevertheless involved here as typal worlds that exist and are interrelated with the earth, embodied in the earth. They seem to rise out of it, but they pre-exist the earth. It is not the earth that produces them. Rather, they, leaning their confluent energies together, establish the earth in the involutionary scheme of things. So, we begin. If we look from this point of view at man's traditional accounts of otherworldly existence, we shall find that mostly they point to worlds of a larger life, liberated from the restrictions and imperfections or incompletenesses of life in earth nature. Put simply, he may be saying here that as we come to know these inner worlds, we know the vital world best. May be saying that. These accounts are evidently built largely by imagination, but there is an element also of intuition and divination, a feeling of what life can be and surely is in some domain of its manifested or its realizable nature. There is also an element of true subliminal contact and experience. But the mind of man translates what he sees or receives or contacts from other nature into figures proper to his own consciousness. They are his translations of supraphysical realities into his own significant forms and images, and through these forms and images, he enters into communication with the realities and can make them, to a certain degree, present and effective. And we note the use of this term, significant form, which originates with Clive Bell in 1914 in the field of aesthetic philosophy, part of the Bloomsbury group. Captures something, doesn't it? Significant form. The experience, he continues, of an after-death continuance of a modified earth life may be explained as due to this kind of translation, but it is also explainable partly as the creation of a subjective post-mortal state in which he still lives in figures of habitual experience before he enters into otherworldly realities, partly as a passage through life worlds where the type of things expresses itself in formations originative of those to which he was attached in his earthly body or akin to them, and therefore exercises a natural attraction on the vital being after its exit from the body. But apart from these subtler life states, The traditional accounts of otherworldly existence contain, though as a rarer, more elevated element not included in the popular notion of these things, a higher grade of states of existence which are clearly of a mental and not a vital character, and others founded on some spiritual mental principle. These higher principles are formulated in states of being into which our inner experience can rise, or the soul enter. So in these larger states accessible to our inner being, these two things are distinguished. Our inner experience can rise, so this is the subjective side of it, or the soul enter, because it's not simply a subjective experience, it's an actual world. So our soul enters these planes. One can experience, one can enter. You see, one is the psychological subjective state of being, the other is the objective entrance into these higher worlds. The principle of gradation we have accepted is therefore justified, provided we recognize that it is one way of organizing our experience and that other ways proceeding from other viewpoints are possible. For a classification can always be valid from the principle and viewpoint adopted by it, while from other principles and viewpoints, another classification of the same things can be equally valid. So we divide these planes into these groupings, and there are various worlds within each plane of being. Plane of matter, the plane of life, the plane of mind, with sub-worlds in running through all of those. But he says this is not the only way to look at it. Indeed, as he has related many of these planes to various points in the chakra system, it's worth noting that he and Mother agreed that there are many divisions possible in that. And while we've settled now on the ordinary Tantra classification of 6, maybe 7 centers of consciousness, Goraksha, when he originated this idea, saw as many as 9. So it is a matter of viewpoint. Where are you standing and looking at it from? But for our purpose, he says, the system we have chosen is of the greatest value because it is fundamental and answers to a truth of the manifestation which is of the utmost practical importance. It helps us to understand our own constituted existence and the course of the involution and the evolutionary motion of nature. In other words, here's the comprehensive theory. This is the big picture. Involution, evolution, why? At the same time, we see that the other worlds are not things quite apart from the material universe and earth nature, but penetrate and envelop it with their influences and have on it a secret incidence of formative and directive force which is not easily calculable. This organization of our otherworldly knowledge and experience supplies us with the clue to the nature and lines of action of this incidence. So all these other planes of being and the many worlds that teem within each plane can have an action upon the earth, and in their intermixture, as these various forces, mental and vital, impinge upon each other as they enter the earth atmosphere and try to sway the development of events and circumstances here. Endlessly complicated. It takes a large and penetrating vision at one and the same time to be able to know with certainty what is going on. The existence and influence of other worlds are a fact of primary importance for the possibilities, and for the scope of our evolution in terrestrial nature. For, if the physical universe were the only field of manifestation of the infinite reality, and at the same time the field of its whole manifestation, we should have to suppose that since all the principles of its being, from matter to spirit, are entirely involved in the apparently inconscient force, which is the basis of the first workings of this universe, they are being evolved by it here completely and here solely, without any other aid or pressure except that of the secret superconscience within it. So he's returned to that root question about materialism. Could it be possible that everything is simply rising out of the material basis, even though it stretches up into the superconscious? There would then be a system of things in which the principle of matter must always remain the first principle, the essential and original determining condition of manifested existence. And if that's true, the argument's over. The game's finished. Spirit might indeed, in the end, arrive to a limited extent at its natural domination. It might make its basis of physical matter a more elastic instrument, not altogether prohibitive of the action of its own highest law in nature, or opposed to that action, as it now is in its inelastic resistance. But spirit would always be dependent upon matter for its field and its manifestation. It could have no other field. It could not get outside it to another kind of manifestation. And within it also, it could not very well liberate any other principle of its being into sovereignty over the material foundation. Matter would remain the one persistent determinant of its manifestation. Life could not become dominant and determinative. Mind could not become the master and creator. Their boundaries of capacity would be fixed by the capacities of matter, which they might enlarge or modify, but would not be able to transform radically or liberate. There would be no place for any free and full manifestation of any power of the being. All would be limited forever by the conditions of an obscuring material formation. Spirit, mind, life would have no native field or complete scope of their own characteristic power and principle. It is not easy to believe in the inevitability of this self-limitation if spirit is the creator and these principles have an independent existence and are not products, results, or phenomena of the energy of matter. So subtly he says, I don't accept this. But given the fact that the infinite reality is free in the nescience of matter before it can at all manifest. Pardon me, let me read that again. But given the fact that the infinite reality is free in the play of its consciousness, it is not bound to involve itself in the nescience of matter before it can at all manifest. So he does not agree, you see, that everything begins from matter, from its enclosure, and therefore is determined by matter. It is possible for it, the reality, which is infinite, to create just the contrary order of things, a world in which the unity of spiritual being is the matrix and first condition of any formation or action. The energy at work is a self-aware spiritual existence in movement, and all its names and forms are a self-conscious play of the spiritual unity. Or it might be an order in which the Spirit's innate power of conscious force or will would realize freely and directly its own possibilities in itself, and not as here, through the restricting medium of the life force and matter. That realization would be at once the first principle of the manifestation and the object of all its free and blissful action. It might be an order again, in which the free play of an infinite mutual self-delight in a multiplicity of beings, conscious not only of their concealed or underlying eternal unity, but of their present joy of oneness, would be the object. In such a system, the action of the principle of self-existent bliss would be the first principle and the universal condition. Again, it might be a world order in which the supermind would be the dominant principle from the beginning. The nature of the manifestation would then be a multiplicity of beings finding, through the free and luminous play of their divine individuality, all the manifold joy of their difference and oneness. So, Sat Chit Ananda. It's possible for a universe, in a sense, to be composed on the basis of existence, the truth of being. Possible for it to be posited on the conscious force that dominates all existence. Possible for it to be an emanation of this wave of delight. Possible for it to be the constructive consciousness of the supermind that creates a harmonic universe. Nor need the series stop here, for we observe that with us, mind is hampered by life and matter, and finds all the difficulty possible in dominating the resistance of these two different powers, and that life itself is similarly restricted by the mortality, the inertia, and the instability of matter. But evidently, there can be a world order in which neither of these two disabilities forms part of the first conditions of existence. Remember, this is what he's trying to establish. What is the first principle? The first position of manifestation. There is the possibility of a world in which mind would be free from the first dominant, free to work upon its own substance or matter as a quite plastic material, or where matter would be quite evidently the result of the universal mind force working itself out in life. It is that even here in reality. But here, the mind force is involved from the beginning, for a long time subconscious, and even when it has emerged, never in free possession of itself, but subject to its encasing material, while there it would be in possession of itself and master of its material, which would be much more subtle and elastic than in a predominantly physical universe. So too, life might have its own world order where it would be sovereign, able to deploy its own more elastic and freely variable desires and tendencies, not menaced at every moment by disintegrating forces, and therefore occupied chiefly with the care of self-preservation and restricted in its play by this state of precarious tension which limits its instincts of free formation, free self-gratification, and free adventure. The separate dominance of each principle of being is an eternal possibility in the manifestation of being, given always that they are principles distinct in their dynamic power and mode of working, even though one in original substance. Well, the hint, the suggestion, the takeaway from this is that all these planes of being, in a sense, have their own conscious substance, their own enlivening power, and their own basis of formation. So in a way, even on the mental plane, there is a kind of life and formation of matter possible, but subject to the ordination of the mind. And in the life plane, there's plenty of light, plenty of conscious power, but there too, there's a substance, which you might call material, and so on and so on. All the planes contain all the planes in seed. He continues then. Even though they're separate like that, they're one in essence of being. That could make no difference if all this were only a philosophical possibility or a potentiality in the being of Satchitananda, which it never realizes or has not yet realized, or if realized, has not brought within the scope of the consciousness of beings living in the physical universe. But all our spiritual and psychic experience bears affirmative witness, brings us always a constant, and in its main principles, an invariable evidence of the existence of higher worlds, freer planes of existence. Not having bound ourselves down, like so much of modern thought, to the dogma that only physical experience or experience based upon the physical sense is true, the analysis of physical experience by the reason alone verifiable, and all else only result of physical experience and physical existence, and anything beyond this an error, self-delusion, and hallucination, we are free to accept this evidence and to admit the reality of these planes. So again, what he is saying is that because we can enter into these larger planes and worlds of being above the physical, with our inner subjectivity and experience them, and enter them strategically, dynamically, with our soul power, actually exist there in those worlds, we can accept as reliable evidence the fruit of all this investigation, and it will outweigh the physical criterion of the modern philosopher. What he is saying then is that it is the yogin who has the greatest, most comprehensive, and most penetrating view, and who should be determining what is and is not real, what is and is not valid. The yogin works with a greater epistemological power than does the philosopher. We see, he continues, that they are practically different harmonies from the harmony of the physical universe. They occupy, as the word plane suggests, a different level in the scale of being, and adopt a different system and ordering of its principles. We need not inquire for our present purpose whether they coincide in time and space with our own world, or move in a different field of space and in another stream of time. In either case, it is in a more subtle substance and with other movements. All that directly concerns us is to know whether they are different universes, each complete in itself and in no way meeting, intercrossing, or affecting the others, or are rather different scales of one graded and interwoven system of being, parts, therefore, of one complex universal system. The fact that they can enter into the field of our mental consciousness would naturally suggest the validity of the second alternative, but it would not by itself be altogether conclusive. But what we find is that these higher planes are actually at every moment acting upon and in communication with our own plane of being, although this action is naturally not present to our ordinary waking or outer consciousness, because that is, for the most part, limited to a reception and utilization of the contacts of the physical world. But the moment we either go back into our subliminal being or enlarge our waking consciousness beyond the scope of the physical contacts, we become aware of something of this higher action. We find even that the human being can project himself partially into these higher planes under certain conditions, even while in the body. A fortiori, that means with stronger reason, must he be able to do it when out of the body, and to do it then completely, since there is no longer the disabling condition of the physical life bound down to the body. So we'll have greater power once we escape the confining influence of physicality. The consequences of this relation and this power of transference are of immense importance. On the one side, they immediately justify, at any rate as an actual possibility, the ancient tradition of at least a temporary sojourn of the human conscious being in other worlds than the physical after the dissolution of the physical body. On the other side, they open to us the possibility of an action of the higher planes on the material existence, which can liberate the powers they represent, the powers of life, mind, and spirit, for the evolutionary intention inherent within nature by the very fact of their embodiment in matter. In other words, these greater powers and fields of consciousness can lean into us and help release their hidden cousins from below, as it were. Mind looked within the encasement of mind in living matter to stir it into movement. Just so, the supramental consciousness from above is looking within what is graded inside of us, teasing it into wakeful action, and eventually forcing its liberated nature to the front. He continues, these worlds are not in their original creation subsequent in order to the physical universe, but prior to it. Prior, if not in time, in their consequential sequence. Let's leave time out of the picture, but in the involutionary chain, from supermind come mind, life, and matter in a downward cascade, which conceals itself in the inconscience and then emerges again as matter, as life, as mind. But they pre-existed. They were already established inwardly as real planes of conscious being before the material universe ever started. For even if there is an ascending as well as a descending gradation, this ascending gradation must be, in its first nature, a provision for the evolutionary emergence in matter, a formative power for its endeavor, contributing to it helpful and adverse elements, and not a mere consequence of the terrestrial evolution. For that is neither a rational probability, nor has it a spiritual or dynamic and pragmatic sense. In other words, the higher worlds have not come into being by a pressure from the lower physical universe, let us say from Satchit Ananda in the physical inconscience, or else by the urge of his being as it emerges from the inconscience into life, mind, and spirit, and experiences the necessity of creating worlds or planes in which those principles shall have a freer play, and in which the human soul may strengthen its vital mental or spiritual tendencies. So there is a purposive construction, and it is not in the inconscient at root. It is not a mental projection, as he says now. Still less are they the creations of the human soul itself, whether Its dreams are the result of the constant self-projections of mankind in its dynamic and creative being beyond the limits of the physical consciousness. The only thing that man clearly creates in this direction is the reflex images of these planes in his own embodied consciousness, and the fitness of his own soul to respond to them, to become aware of them, to participate consciously in the interweaving of their influences with the action of the physical plane. He may indeed contribute the results or projections of his own higher vital and mental action to the action of these planes, but if so, these projections are, after all, only a return to the higher planes upon themselves, a return from the earth of their powers, which have come down from them to the earth mind, since this higher vital and mental action is itself the result of influences transmitted from above. It is possible also that he can create a certain kind of subjective annex to which these supraphysical planes, or at least to the lower of them, environments of a half-unreal character, which are rather self-created envelopes of his conscious mind and life than true worlds, they are the reflections of his own being, an artificial environment corresponding to his attempt during life to image these other worlds, heavens and hells, projected by the image-creating faculty in his human power of conscious being. But neither of these two contributions at all means a total creation of a real plane of being founded and acting on its own separate principle. So, we have not created by projection these other worlds. We have not authored them. They do not arise from our experience, etc. We experience something of them, and what is admissible and, in a sense, translatable into terms our consciousness can appreciate is what we typically experience when we go there. But they have their own reality, and much of the form that we give to them is inspired by those worlds themselves. These planes, or systems, are then at least coeval and coexistence. Coeval means the same age. Coexistent means they exist together. These planes or systems are then at least coeval and coexistent with that which presents itself to us as the physical universe. So they don't come into being afterwards. They're already there. We have been led to conclude that the development of life, mind, and spirit in the physical being presupposes their existence. For these powers are developed here by two cooperating forces, an upward tending force from below, an upward drawing and downward pressing force from above. For there is the necessity in the inconscient of bringing out what is latent within it, and there is the pressure of the superior principles in the higher planes, which not only aids this general necessity to realize itself, but may very largely determine the special ways in which it is eventually realized. It is this upward drawing action and this pressure, this insistence from above, which explain the constant influence of the spiritual, mental, and vital worlds upon the physical plane. It is evident that, given a complex universe and 7 principles interwoven in every part of its system, and naturally, therefore, drawn to act upon and respond to each other wherever they can at all get at one another, such an action, such a constant pressure and influence, is an inevitable consequence, must be inherent in the very nature of the manifested universe. So, we're rising up from below. There is something in the inconscient which wants to drive it forward, but also from above in the planes superior to the physical, in the life world, in the mental world, in the superphysical planes beyond, there's an eagerness to induce the cosmos to divulge its secrets, to move forward, to progress, etc. So they're constantly pouring their influences on us. We don't live in isolation in the material world. It's not just up to us. All the planes of being, all the way up to the Supreme, are richly engaged with us here. And if we become aware of it, the commerce, the collaboration, endless, harmonic. If we restrict ourselves to simply the material view, then we're dulled down. And being open to those worlds, if they pour their true influence and power into us, we blast through all the stadia of resistance. Yard after yard after yard is reclaimed. Much can we do. A secret continuous action of the higher powers and principles from their own planes upon terrestrial being and nature through the subliminal self, which is itself a projection from those planes into the world born of the inconscience, must have an effect and a significance. Its first effect has been the liberation of life and mind out of matter. Its last effect has been to assist the emergence of a spiritual consciousness, a spiritual will and spiritual sense of existence in the terrestrial being, so that he is no longer solely preoccupied with his outermost life or with that and mental pursuits and interests, but has learned to look within, to discover his inner being, his spiritual self, to aspire to overpass earth and her limitations. As he grows more and more inward, his boundaries, mental, vital, spiritual, begin to broaden. The bonds that held life, mind, soul to their first limitations loosen or snap. And man, the mental being, begins to have a glimpse of a larger kingdom of self and world closed to the first earth life. No doubt, so long as he lives mainly on his surface, he can only build a sort of superstructure, ideal and imaginative and ideative, upon the ground of his normal, narrow existence. But if he makes the inward movement, which his own highest vision has held up before him as his greatest spiritual necessity, then he will find there in his inner being a larger consciousness, a larger life. An action from within and an action from above can overcome the predominance of the material formula, diminish and finally put an end to the power of the inconscience, reverse the order of the consciousness, substitute the spirit for matter as his conscious foundation of being, and liberate its higher powers to their complete and characteristic expression in the life of the soul embodied in nature. An action from within and an action from above. The call and the grace in the first chapter of the Mother. We began this evening with Vasanti Rao's rendition of the Guru Stotra. A living inspiration, that. And now we turn to Savitri. This is a section that I have read to you before, but it was about 2.5 years ago. I presume you forgive the repetition. This is from Book 2, the Book of the Traveler of the Worlds, Canto 1, The World Stare. There, walled apart by its own innerness, in a mystical barrage of dynamic light, he saw a lone, immense, high-curved world pile, erect like a mountain chariot of the gods, motionless under an inscrutable sky. As if from matter's plinth and viewless base to a top as viewless, a carved sea of worlds, climbing with foam-maned waves to the supreme, ascended towards breadths immeasurable. It hoped to soar into the ineffable's reign. 100 levels raised it to the unknown. So it towered up to heights intangible, and disappeared in the hushed conscious vast, as climbs a storied temple tower to heaven, built by the aspiring soul of man to live near to his dream of the invisible. Infinity calls to it as it dreams and climbs. Its spire touches the apex of the world. Mounting into great voiceless stillnesses, it marries the earth to screened eternities. Amid the many systems of the One, made by an interpreting creative joy, alone it points us to our journey back out of our long self-loss in nature's deeps. Planted on earth, it holds in it all realms. It is a brief compendium of the vast. This was the single stair to being's goal, a summary of the stages of the spirit, its copy of the cosmic hierarchies, refashioned in our secret air of self, a subtle pattern of the universe. It is within, below, without, above. Acting upon this visible nature's scheme, it wakens our earth matter's heavy doze to think and feel and to react to joy. It models in us our diviner parts, lifts mortal mind into a greater air, makes yearn this life of flesh to intangible aims, links the body's death with immortality's call. Out of the swoon of the inconscience, it labors towards a superconscient light. If earth were all, and this were not in her, thought could not be, nor life delight's response. Only material forms could then be her guests, driven by an inanimate world force. Earth, by this golden superfluity, bore thinking man, and more than man shall bear. This higher scheme of being is our cause, and holds the key to our ascending fate. It calls out of our dense mortality the conscious spirit nursed in matter's house. The living symbol of these conscious planes, its influences and godheads of the unseen, its unthought logic of reality's acts, arisen from the unspoken truth in things, have fixed our inner life's slow-scale degrees. Its steps are paces of the soul's return from the deep adventure of material birth, a ladder of delivering ascent, and rungs that nature climbs to deity. Bon fête. Happy birthday, dear Kapaliji. Namaste. Jai Ma. Much love to